All right, give me a second. I gotta make sure this stuff is working. I just had a hard time with the sound. I couldn't hear my own sound. So patience. We hadn't had sound issues in a long time, so kind of interesting. Oh my God. Woohoo! We back in business. We got sound, love. All right, let me check. What was that? The used tubes. Man, listen. I don't even know what did I do. Oh, something. I guess Streamlabs updated or something, and it changed my microphone to. I don't even know. It wasn't even a microphone. It was just numbers and letters and tomfoolery. So, forgive me for that. Like I said, we haven't had sound issues in a minute. I'm just trying to make sure it's working because I really don't be trying to spend too much. All right, we back in business. Oh my God. So okay. So hopefully we get the people back. If not, they'll be all right. We won't cry this time. Soul Swami. Let me see. So I appreciate your patience. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Again, something unexpected. So I thought it'd be easy. I thought we was just gonna have wardrobe issues, but today we had wardrobe and technology issues. You know how I always trying to embarrass you in front of your in front of your friends and family, how you out here looking bad. So, but I'm glad y'all won't hold it against me. Okay, so now that we're in business, we can get this show started. I can get the jibber jabbing again. So beyond the wardrobe malfunction, I apologize for the I moved the keyboard. Oh, put the wrong thing down. The delay and having to restart the show. No, I don't want to end the stream. Cancel. So accidentally hit a button on the remote control. I mean, not the on the keyboard. So, okay, so today's show we're gonna talk about a couple of things. I don't have a live reading, but we get past that. We all right. We got sound back, so that's something to be excited about. And but I do have a couple of topics I want to discuss. Uh, and then I got a couple of videos that are going to help the conversation along. When we get to that point. So one of the things I guess this is the time when we normally do our little check in or whatever. I talk about the things that's happened during the week that led into this show. So one of the things that's been on my mind and my heart a lot since we had the conversation, the show about when the glass was broken, I had a little clarity about the blocked out memories and all of that. That emotional show, and then dating, and then we talked about the icing on the cake show. But I actually been thinking, and even in work as well, I've been thinking about how we as people give others the authority to decide our value. And sometimes giving people those, I'm glad you made it back. I appreciate it. I don't know if you heard, I guess Streamlabs update, they gave us some new thing and I didn't log back in, so it changed my mic on its own. And but we here, we jibber jabbing again, you know what I mean? Like I said, we just needed a flashback. I've been looking at some of those old videos anyway and laughing, so I guess we just needed a reminder on how far we came as a group, as a healing tribe. You know what I mean? So thanks for coming back. But as I was saying, we were talking about some of the ways that we give people the authority to judge our value, and how sometimes put people in that authority it can have us in a precarious place emotionally as far as our view of self and how we value ourselves. So, one of the ways that we give people authority to judge our value is through work. You know, if you want to build a career or have a job or any of those things, it is, for lack of better words, a value assessment. How valuable you are to the market. How usable are you to whether it be your job market or the market as a whole? Does your skills add benefit, right? So you go through the application process. All of that is a value, a judgment of your value. Whether you get then, if you get hired, that's a judgment because then you feel valuable. But if you don't ever hear from those jobs, if you send out 250 applications and you get no call back, that can do something to your self value or your view of self as far as it relates to career or even on a larger level. And God forbid you get terminated. I know I've been in a position to have to terminate. Well, I ain't have to do anything, but I've been in a position where I was terminating people, and I've been in a position where I have been terminated, and neither side of those feel good. You know what I mean? Because it does question your value, especially if you're in one of those situations where you felt or it is true that you were doing the right thing, making sure you're taking the right steps, all of that. It can definitely change how you view yourself or make it a little more difficult to maintain the self view that you have, if it's positive or healthy, or things like that can go into feeding it be reinforcement, as we say, negative reinforcement for the negative thoughts that you have about yourself. Another way that we give people the authority to judge our value is through platonic friendships. And it's a wild thing about that because sometimes when you become friends with someone, you believe that you both are on the same wavelength or you on the same page. And it's hard to see how friends judge your value. But starting from a kid to you going up, I mean, to an adult, friends judge your value. So, for example, when you're a child, if you play sports or anything like that, and I don't mean organized sports, but I mean you just hanging out with your friends and you're going to go play basketball somewhere at the gym. And you have that moment, and everybody had this moment where it'd be dodgeball, volleyball in school. You have that moment where they got two captains, and the two captains got to pick their teams. And as they start picking people, that is a value statement about how valuable you would be to this team. And you can receive that in very interesting ways. Then, as you become an adult, another way that you are gauged or your value is judged by your friends is as simple as it is, who seeks advice from you? If you don't have any of your friends asking you for advice, that says how valuable they think your advice is to the friend group or how helpful your advice is to the friend group. You know what I mean? It says something about you. And at some point, you will have to make an assessment or it can take a jab at your view of self. You know what I mean? And it might just be in a place where you're not as accessible for your friends to ask for the advice. But them or who comes to you for advice is a sign of it's a value, a judgment of your value. And one of the more ways that we do it, um, one of the more prevalent ways that we really acknowledge that we give people the authority to judge our value is through dating. Dating, that whole dating process is a value process. And dating and your responses and the actions and behaviors that you experience in dating can change the way you view yourself. For example, people have a difficult time accepting the rejection. And that is not a gender specific thing. It is a people thing in the sense that there are people of all genders or all identities that struggle to accept rejection, right? And if you get rejected enough, and it doesn't matter if you swimming in the right pool or not, if you receive enough rejection, it is going to do something to your view of self. You know what I mean? And speaking from a man's perspective, generally in the dating process, if I meet a woman today that I find interesting or I find attractive or anything, in whatever words you would like to use, because I'm a man, I'm supposed to put forth an effort that she can judge the value of my effort before she gives effort or before she accepts my advances. You know what I mean? So dating has been a position for myself where I've given people the authority that to judge my value. And one of the mistakes that I've made is I've given people the authority to judge my value who should not have that authority at all. You know what I mean? And some of that goes back into some of the things that we're talking about and some of the things we'll talk about a little bit later on why I'll allow some of these people who should not have the authority to judge my value. Um, and I gave them that authority through dating. Like I said, there was one thing that I thought I was taught as a man. That's what you're supposed to do. You allow the woman to judge your value, and if she finds you valuable, then she can return the favors or the advances or whatever. Reciprocity begins. But anyway, so when I say this to you, because I know I'm not alone in this, I'm sure when you think about it and you think about some of your experiences in dating with friends or at work, you can clearly see that there are points and times where you have given people who should not have the authority to judge, who should not be judging you, the authority to judge your value in some sense. Now, value, I don't say value is the same as worthiness because those are two different things. You know what I mean? And I probably should have brought the definition of value here so we all could be working on that same definition, but I didn't this time. But value, for the most part, is to the system and then your view of self. So all of this is going to lead into something. And the funny thing about the the value thing and dating, I think I've done somewhat of a disservice in the dating process, specifically as a man. And this goes into this idea of ghosting. So, in the disservice that I've done in dating, I don't think I've always made it very clear that in this process, although I know I give this person the authority to judge my value, I don't think I always make it that clear that I'm doing the same. Whether it's known to you or not, please believe I'm judging the value. I'm judging if you would be a help or a hindrance to my life or my life's path. I'm judging the value of you as well. But I don't always convey that clearly because I'm in the position of showing my value, trying to prove my value or something like that in the dating process. Just because I'm a man, you're supposed to do it. The man's supposed to make the advances. The man's supposed to talk to the woman. As a man, that's what you're supposed to do. So I'm not complaining about that. I'm just showing. I'm just saying how in that process it's a value statement, and I've given people the authority to judge my value, and some of those people I should not have given that authority to. But back to this idea of ghosting. So in this dating process and given this value and all that stuff, sometimes when I meet someone and I do my own personal value assessment, I would deem that a relationship with that person would not be healthy or not good for me, myself, right? And I am one of those people who firmly believe in ghosting. I think it's a place and a time. I don't think any of the negative things that people say about ghosting because when people say ghosting is like, no lie, I seen a post where some guy was saying that ghosting is a coward's behavior. And I was thinking how strong that word coward is. Because if you can think of one situation where ghosting is okay, and somebody disproved him because some woman commented on that comment and say, well, ghosting is okay if you being stalked. Right. But my point is, if you can think of one situation where it would be okay, you might need to step back from using hard words like coward for ghosting. But for me, I believe in ghosting because I just thought, honestly, the wild thing about it is, for me, initially on the surface, I really just thought that it serves a purpose. You know what I mean? Not all conversations need to be had, and I think sometimes we invite more drama into our lives by having certain conversations, especially conversations around rejections. You know what I mean? So, but one thing that I've been trying to do is also dig a little deeper. So on the surface, those are my justifications for ghosting. But I'm in the men's group. We talked about it, and last night was crazy because we were talking about love and communication, which was interesting, which is one of the reasons why it's the focal point of the show tonight. But we were talking about love and communication, and it got me to thinking about the idea of ghosting, right? And I had to take a little time to look at the other side of my ideas. Because the thing about it is, a lot of times we have these thoughts and these ideas, and once we deem them okay, we don't look any further. So that's why I profess to y'all or tell you all, promote to you all that once you get that surface, once you get that first answer, question that, then you get the second answer, question that, then when you get the third, that might be the answer. So in doing this process that I tell you all to do, doing it with myself, I had to ask a lot of questions. And one thing that came up in the group meeting that really struck a chord with my spirit was a lot of times in these situations where I chose to ghost, it's because I didn't feel safe enough to emote. And when I say emote, I didn't feel a safe enough place to be able to communicate all the feelings I was feeling. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you have to say some things about people that they don't want to hear or they don't believe about themselves. And one thing that I never wanted to do, which is crazy, which is show up a little bit later, is really hurt anybody's feelings. So some of that was conflict avoidance. You know what I mean? With good intentions. But we already talked about how the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So you can have the best intentions, but still be creating a personal hell for someone else. But my main thing that I realized is that in those relationships, I didn't feel safe to emote, to be able to express the various emotions that I had. And some of them were, like I said, they weren't necessarily good. And I think their behaviors reinforced my fears or concerns about expressing my emotions. And later on, I had to do a little work about figuring out what in me allows me to pick people who behaviors confirm or reaffirm my fears. So someone asked a question, do I think that ghosting someone would hurt their feelings? I think that depends. So the second reason that I will ghost people is I think sometimes the people didn't care. And as well as I do, there are sometimes, they have that cliche statement. If people don't appreciate your presence, they'll appreciate your absence. That is good in theory. But we all have had that experience where people didn't appreciate your presence and they can care less about your absence. So Does ghosting hurt people's feelings? Yes. But I also think that's contextual. And later on, we'll get a little bit deeper on one of the contexts that I think that ghosting does not serve a purpose. So, for example, one way that I think ghosting does serve a purpose, if I met you, let's say today's Tuesday and I met you last Thursday. We had two conversations. Within that two conversations, you asked me for money. I'm not going to be like, hey, I know I just met you. And we're not going to have that deep level of communication. You don't owe me anything. I don't owe you anything. Just like people at that point in the stage, people can choose to not talk to you anymore. You may have shown red flags that people choose not to communicate. And you know, at the beginning, when people think they're putting their best foot forward, if you tell them, like, hey, I don't really like that, and I don't think we're going to go further, that rejection aspect comes in. But like I said, the other thing is, um, I really didn't think that they care. Something that I left out was when I was talking about the giving the authority of people, I mean, to judge our value with work, platonic, and romantic. Well, I did talk about how I don't think I always made it clear that they were being judged too. And I talked about it in romance, but in all those relationships, whether it be work or platonic, you are judging them as well. So, um, one thing that I really realized, which now I ghosting wasn't the only two I had. Now I'm always a person that believes in communication first, but you got to know, like I said, it's context. But I had other tools that I didn't always use as much as I should have. And one is, like I said, communicating why I don't want to be with someone, right? And and I told y'all, or I mentioned earlier, that some of that was conflict avoidance. You know what I mean? I don't want to create a conflict. Some of that, I'm an empath. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. That empath thing, I use that loosely too. But I'm an empath, and I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings and all of those things. So, which is crazy to your point, is sometimes this is why that intentions don't always matter, outcomes do, because sometimes what we're trying to avoid, we wind up creating. So I'm very much sure some of those times that I ghosted, it hurt people's feelings. You know what I mean? Because I was trying to avoid hurting their feelings and still wind up doing it. It winds up being those what we talked about, self-fulfilling prophecies. So what I did realize, and one of the things that um, I want to communicate, that I want to give you all encouragement about communicating your rejections or why you don't want to be with people. We always try to be gentle, or why you don't want to be in a situation, or why you don't want to accept that job. Because what I realized is what I was doing by doing that, even though I may have had the best intentions in my mind, whether I convinced myself they were or not, is I was stealing people's opportunity for growth. And I really thought about that because when I didn't tell them what the issue was, or what I felt, or what my judgment was, a lot of times these people will go on in life thinking that they were perfect and they did everything perfect. And you know, it takes some sort of cataclysmic event to motivate us down this path of healing. Most people don't just sit around and decide, you know what, I think I'm going to start healing tomorrow. You just wind up hitting that, what do they call that, tipping point, and you tip over. You like, yo, I can't live like this, and you go forward. So what I realized by not doing that is I was stealing people's opportunity for growth, right? And something that tied to me that helped me see that, like I said, as we were talking about in the men's group. and we were talking about love and communication. And one of the questions that came up was, when do you start communicating those things spiritually? And that had me stuck for a minute. And you can believe that because on this show, I talked with you all about it probably last week. Or no, it's definitely, we definitely talked about it when we talked about the icing on the cake thing. Because, I had that conversation about words and actions. You know what I mean? Like, people want to hear your words, and then, you know, you get past listening to words and you move on to excuse me, actions, and you feel like you don't want to hear it, you just need to see it. And then you learn that there's a balance between action and words that need to be had for trust and communication to be built. But when he asked that question, and especially all the work that we're doing trying to heal ourselves emotionally and spiritually, when do we start communicating these things spiritually? And the wild thing about it was, I'm at the point where I thought actions and words were enough. So if my actions didn't show you, and this is the thing about the ghosting. Now, I never just been like, oh God, she chewed her gum twice. I don't like that. I generally give people the opportunity to address whatever my issue is. And if I don't feel like you addressing my issue, or I'll tell you, I definitely tell you what the issue is a lot of times. But people don't always hear it. So I don't always set up a moment. Well, let's sit down so I can dump you formally. You know what I mean? I don't know. I like, maybe I need to use my ghosting and call it informal dumping. So I like informal dumping, but I generally would tell you what my issue is, or like, I don't like, a lot of times people don't value what I say because I'm humorous. I like to deliver things in a way that people can eat easy, palatable little bites. And sometimes that's humorous. And people don't always think I'm serious because it's humorous. But I told you, I can tell you about anything and make it hilarious. But that doesn't mean it's not serious. So when they asked me that question, I had to realize, even by me communicating why I don't want you, I'm making it clear. I need to make it clear along the line that I'm judging you as well. And now I know, one of my gifts is spiritual. You know what I mean? Being able to communicate with you all energy wise, which I still see as spirit, or however you might see it. But I mean, energy, spirit, whatever word you might use, is one of my gifts. But I never really use it in communication. You know what I mean? Which is wild. Which is wild. Which is funny because I'm sure sometimes during the show you all can see when my spirit comes into play, and it's just its own little light. You know what I mean? But I don't always notice that because I don't really communicate with spirit except for when I'm telling stories or when I'm telling a joke or something like that. And so when he asked that question, it made me think about how stealing people's opportunity for growth, and then cheating myself by not even sharpening my tools of spiritual communication. Right. So I've even stunted my own growth by not doing that. Terrence T, glad to have you here again, brother. I appreciate you as always. As a matter of fact, I was talking about some of the men's group stuff when we was talking about communication a minute before. So appreciate you giving a shout out. You know what I mean? If any of y'all, and I talk about this men's group a lot. It's a Facebook men's group, Strength and Brotherhood. Check us out. Look us up. Uh, it's a men's only group, but the group is the doorway to the group chat, and the group chat is the doorway to the men's meeting. So you get in the group, then you can get through the doorways. So, in thinking about how, communicating spiritually and how I was cheating people as far as their opportunity for growth, and cheating myself as far as the opportunity to be able to sharpen my skill set, I had to think about one of the issues that may be in the way of doing that. And one of the main issues has been vulnerability. And it's a wild thing because vulnerability probably comes up on this show every episode, especially when we have guests, or especially when you decide to share in the comments. And it's always amazing how we can have people, some people come in here and get in that comment and start telling all their life story. And then some people come in and never say a word because they just want to view. And I appreciate it all, but I do understand that it takes a certain level of vulnerability to create this safe space for communication, right? And when I talk about the safe level, I mean a level of vulnerability, I mean within you, not the other person. Now, of course, the other person does matter because context matters, but this is the self healing aspect that we're talking about. And one of the things that I mean as far as trying to create this self place, you need some self awareness, and specifically self awareness of your triggers. So, for example, when we talked about it, when we talked about my childhood a little bit, and I talked about I was raised in one of those situations where you can do better, you can do better, you can do better. You know what I mean? So the other side of pushing your children to excel is it can also be seen as critical. You know what I mean? Or criticizing. And if you do it enough and without enough congratulations of the accomplishments, then it's definitely going to be digested as criticism, whether they're successful or not. They're just successful to critical parents, right? So you have to have a sense of self awareness of your triggers before you can establish a safe place for communication, right? Which is one of the issues I've had, which I said I used ghosting. We weren't, neither one of us were aware of our triggers, right? And this process that we're going through does make us aware of our triggers. Outside of being aware of your triggers, then you also have to have communicated those triggers. A lot of times people be in a triggered place, or we don't even recognize we're triggered. But we do have to understand. So, like the example that came up in the men's group is you get in from work and your woman immediately starts complaining about some of the things she's had to deal with throughout the day. You know what I mean? Because we were talking about timing. And the thing about that was that can be triggering to a lot of people. So as men, we sat in a group and talked about ways that we can navigate that by just communicating, hey, can I have 5 minutes? Or actually getting beyond ourselves and sitting down and listening. You know what I mean? Sometimes you have to recognize that your trigger is that emotion to want to defend yourself, the emotion to want to leave, the emotion to want to avoid is triggered. That is a sign that you are triggered. And that is the truth, right? So sometimes we don't communicate our triggers for fear of them being used against us, right? Which is true. But remember, we're looking at the glass half full and we are on a healing path. So being on that healing path, we're going to pick different type of situations, right? And in those different types of situations, what we're doing is recognizing our role in creating these safe places that we want to be, right? So I cannot expect my woman to communicate openly with me if I don't communicate openly with her, right? And I guess as a man, I may see this a little bit differently because I do think that one of the man's role is to create a foundation. We are builders. You know what I mean? Women are nurturers. So for the most part, I'm good at seeing what's broken and fixing, and women good at seeing what's fixed and making it better. So I do think it's our role to set the foundation. But whether it's male or female, we both have a responsibility to create the environment that we want, right? Being aware of our triggers is one. And if you find yourself in a situation where you don't feel, well, because we don't want to go by feelings, because some of our feelings are still defensive mechanisms to protect ourselves. But if you don't feel safe enough to be able to communicate your triggers to that person, first question yourself. Is it your fears holding you back from communicating? Do you think that you still pick the same person? Or do you trust your judgment and picking? Do you expect the same outcome from a different person? Are you creating those self-fulfilling prophecies, right? And that isn't to say that what you ask that people don't use your triggers against you, because people will. But we are not functioning with those people, because people who move like that don't just all of a sudden move like that. We are using our awareness, we are using our healing, we are using our clear minds, and we are using our third eye, our intuition, to help us navigate the energies around us. And that's where we have to trust ourselves a little bit more, right? So, outside of self awareness of our triggers, another thing that we have to be able to do is be willing to receive. And this can be very hard for people who are right or people who are givers, right? So if you're ever in a situation that you feel like you're right about, sometimes it's going to be hard for you to receive. One thing very specifically: constructive criticism. This is one of the reasons why I talk about be careful of those intentions, because your intentions can be right, but if you're not looking at the outcomes, you will not be able to see. You will not be able to see how things could be better, or the hell you created for someone else. So when you're trying to create this safe place for vulnerability to communicate, you have to be in a place to receive. That's receive the other person's opinions, receive the other person's perspectives, receive the other person's criticisms. And I specifically left off that word constructive because in that moment, they don't always sound constructive. So, for example, like when we talked about the icing on the cake and me needing a maid, one word that I used was hypercritical. If you're having a conversation with someone and they say, "Hey, I think you're hypercritical," that is going to be hard to receive, especially if you do not see yourself as a hypercritical person. We have this image of who we are, but our actions and behaviors don't always match that. All right. So, as much as you are willing to give, you must also be willing. I mean, excuse me, as much as you are willing to receive, and I put that first because this is the order. You got to be aware of your triggers. You got to give the space for someone else. And then you got to be willing to give as well. So, and when I say willing to give, and this sets the foundation for everything that we do on here, I mean specific things. You have to be willing to give the vulnerability you seek. And that's the wild thing about it is a lot of people want vulnerability. They want the communication, but they live behind this wall where they don't want to do that. They don't want to receive that. They don't want to give that. So the one of the things you have to be is a model. And I come from education, so it's one of those things that I'm kind of attached to by the hip. But modeling behaviors, positive reinforcement, modeling behaviors. Then the other thing that you're going to have is patience. Patience with yourself and patience with the other person. Because a lot of times we think that No, we know that people don't say everything right. But when we're caught up in the mix, sometimes we can't give that patient, or can we apply that knowledge? Not everyone is a master wordsmith. As good as I am at words, I've had to take years of practice, years of training, years of everything to be this comfortable with words. And you best believe I say things wrong all the time, all the time. Outside of patience, you have to be willing to give understanding. So you got to work through that. That's a place that you work to, but you want to give understanding. Understanding include benefit of the doubt, seeking to learn other perspectives, space for that. You have to give these things to help create this vulnerability or this safe space that you want to be able to communicate in. And all that leads me up to a couple of videos and a couple of battles that I've had to deal with. And I say this because, I ask a lot of you all, excuse me, and I appreciate all that you give, but I definitely do ask a lot of you all that requires vulnerability, whether you do it on live, and congrats to the people who had the courage or the gumption or whatever word the spirit moved them to do it on live, because the amount of vulnerability it takes to expose yourself to the world is amazing. Then the people who do private sessions with me, the amount of vulnerability to have to literally let a stranger, and it's wild because I'm not a stranger to all of these people, but in this avenue, in this realm, the level of things I learn about people, the level of things they have to share, I am a stranger. They've never done any of these things with me, and a lot of times with very few people, period. So I appreciate that. And one of the things that I do for you all is model the behaviors back. So the next phase of the next section of tonight's show is going to be a little me vulnerable. Some of the lessons, all of it is lessons that I've learned that you can apply to yourself. Some of the stuff is going to be stuff that you can apply to yourself, your life, or whatever. But we're just going to work through it together. All right. So, listen, I got to give some caveats, not guessings. Here we go. I got to give, oh my God. Wait a minute. Let me go back to my other scene. I got to open it back up. I didn't see that it closed down with all of our issues we had earlier. But if you think it's something that I left out as far as the vulnerability it takes to create a safe space for communication, leave an idea in the chat. What is something that you think is important to be included with communication?
Another controversial topic is that.
Oh, hold on. What's next? Add to. Okay. All right. So we got it. Got the videos up. Hold on. Let me get some of the stuff out the way. Let's see. You had something? Oh no. You just tell me I got a word tonight. I appreciate your support. I feel like I ain't seen you in a couple of weeks too, Marlena. I thought we was gonna have to send the people after you. You know what I mean? All right, there we go. Now we're in business. So, okay. Caveat. I know that this man can say some very interesting things. But as a boy raised by a single mother, a lot of stuff that he says I disagree with. And I think I've talked about it before. One of the reasons I disagree with is because I do have the luxury to disagree. Because, like I said, we recognize in our gifts and how our greatness. So when it comes to statistics for boys who grew up like me, I did a lot of things in spite, and I apply that to the majority, but the majority are not like that. And because of that, there are certain questions I never asked myself. But because we're on this this healing journey, I'm forced to ask questions. So he's going to say some stuff. I might pause and be like, I don't agree with that. But there's a point that I want to discuss. And it's about masculinity and how I learned about masculinity. So, Marlena, I'll give you a pass though. So I know you here when you can, and we love you when you're here. You know what I mean? You did have the best jokes for a while when you was killing me and my sound used to sound like a DJ. I think, you know what? As a matter of fact, I think I'm about to blame you because sound has been tremendous until you show back up this episode. No, I'm joking. Please come back. I'm not saying that so you don't come back. Please come back. So we're gonna watch this video. I don't even know if I'm watching this whole video. The next one is one we're gonna have a real discussion about. The whole purpose of me showing this video because something was said and it hit me like a ton of bricks as a truth. So here we go.
Single moms can raise sons on their own.
No, that's impossible. You can only show them how to be a good woman.
Okay, so that's an example where I think he was taking it too far. A woman can do more than show a son how to be a good woman. That's crazy talk.
Men that our mothers are telling us to be don't even exist in her bed.
When he said that, that's the statement that kind of punched me in my stomach. Yeah, it definitely hit me in my stomach. Yeah, because I was raised in a single household, and it was interesting about this idea of masculinity and what it takes to be a man. But yeah.
Our mothers are telling us to be the kind of man she can't even attract into the house. So how can she guide me to be a man when she don't even have a man? She don't even know a man. Her daddy was fucked up. Her brother was fucked up. My daddy was fucked up. She had a baby by my sister. How can she take?
So, although he limited it to something as simple as attraction, I don't think it's an attraction thing. I don't think it's that simple. But I think sometimes what it is to be a man isn't necessarily properly conveyed. And one thing I learned about people from working in the community for years is if you don't clearly explain everything out with no gaps, people will fill in the holes, the gaps, right? So as much as he said he is attraction, they can't attract. I don't think it's an attraction thing at all. You know what I mean? I think it's like I said, the idea of what it takes to be a man is very much misconstrued, and yeah, it's just crazy what you hear a man is, right? And the funny thing about that is, for my own childhood, my mother didn't really have us around no bad guys. You know what I mean? I ain't really experienced no bad men. When she decided to date, she dated accomplished men. You know what I mean? For the most part, even my daddy, and she got divorced. He 20 years in the military, so she dated accomplished men. But the thing about it was the idea of manhood that she was trying to put in her children. To this day, I have never seen that man, right? And it's this idea of this man who just works hard, not affected by anything. He's just solid and tough, a manly, burly man, whatever that stuff means, right? But what it winds up doing is creating situations where young boys suppress their emotions to be this phallicized idea of what a man is, right? And it doesn't create this vulnerability that we just discussed to emote or communicate, which what is something that boys need, a whole space to be able to communicate their feelings and what they're dealing with. And then we definitely need examples of men we can be, not idealistic men. You know what I mean? Not idealistic men, like men I can actually go and see. And I've talked, and like, we've been growing up, I was city council, politicians, judges, lawyers, my best friend, like it wasn't like I didn't have the opportunity to meet examples of men that I could be. They just didn't match the idea or the concept of manhood that was being taught to me, right? And that put me in a position where I just decided to do my own thing, which sucks, which led back to that conversation that we had last week where most of my ideas of masculinity came from my friends, and that's it. And the reason why, because I got to a point where I learned that the ideas of masculinity that I was getting were mostly coming from women. They weren't even coming from men. They weren't even coming from men. We didn't like, this is how I know my generations and generations before have failed the younger men. Because I can't really think of a lot of times where older men set us down and gave us a space where we can ask those questions, where men can give us guidance. So we have to ask our mamas, and mamas tell them what they think happens, not a real process. You know what I mean? So that punched me in my stomach, and it had me stuck for a minute because I had to acknowledge that this idea of masculinity or manhood that I've been taught, not just from my mom, but from women in society, because there are men who buy into these ideas too, because they've been taught the same thing, was that man does not exist. This man does not exist. And if he does, like I said, he sacrificed something that you may not want to sacrifice. And the prime example I got of that was, I'll never forget, a couple of years ago, it was this guy, this dude went viral, and I think he was on Fix My Life as well too. So this is where I found out the Second Life. And when he went viral, he was standing in the middle of the living room talking about how he provides for his family, pays all the bills, do all this, blah, 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 blah. And you know what I heard when he said all that? You know what it sound like? You ain't there. And you know what family's like? A father who's there. So as much as we like to provide, if you spend all your time providing, when are you going to be there? Right? So, and everybody was promoting on how this is how a man's supposed to function and all these things. And then that family got on Fix My Life. And you come to find out that while he was out doing all that work, there was no man at home to protect his daughters from SA. So most of all his daughters had experienced that in their house while he was at work. So, like I said, this idea of manhood doesn't exist. So as a man or as a mom or as a woman, if you have a boy, you have to create a safe place for communication and give your boy models of men that he can possibly be, and create a space for him to decide what type of man he wants to be, because he's going to have to be his own man for the rest of his life. Right. Thank you so much. You remember that episode. Okay, so the next video, this one punched me in my stomach too. They were killing me this week. But it's funny because, you know, when you ask for clarity and you ask for understanding, you can't always say where you get it from. Right. And, you know, it's funny because in this healing process, one of the things that I recognize in people, and I say that, you know, they say game recognize game and all that. One of the reasons I got Mothers of the Water, is that it? Hape, one of them. Hape was because I was seeing that a lot of people had mom issues. And a lot of times when we look at mother issues, or we look at issues, it's always from this terrible, terrible place. You know what I mean? And in the mindset for healing, the way we want to look at issues is opportunity for growth. You know what I mean? Opportunity for healing. So issues aren't a negative thing. They're not a good or bad. It's what we assign to them. But they are opportunity for growth. So this next video gave me an opportunity for growth. And I don't know how I fell up on this thing. Like
Tell me what kind of man to be.
A man with a mother wound was likely a victim of narcissistic abuse from his mother as a child.
Okay. So, you know, I always say pay attention to words. This is an example of when you need to pay attention to words. So I don't want anybody to go out there saying that the only way that this happens is from narcissistic abuse. That's not the only way. He said likely, but a lot of things can be likely. So that's not the only avenue. Pay attention to people's word choice. They pick the words for a specific reason. Likely means it happens a lot, but there are other reasons. And for me, I don't think that this was, because it's actually, matter of fact, because what was running up on what else I was getting, because as much as we talk about the male narcissist, we don't really talk about the female narcissist. So I've been having information about female narcissists. And although it was funny, because one of the first things I shared with my friend, one of the first things they said about female narcissists is selective amnesia. And I started laughing because as soon as I said it, she said, well, that's just a woman's problem. And I laughed, right? So that's why I say you got to be careful about using words like narcissism, because a trait does not make you a narcissist. Defensive does not make you a narcissist. Selective amnesia is a narcissistic trait, but just because you have that does not make you a narcissist. So, like I said, likely, I don't think narcissism was my issue, but like I said, we talked about it. They definitely can be scary. And one of the comments, I don't know if you see, say female narcissists are the scariest. They can be scary. Be careful about saying which ones can be the scariest, because it doesn't matter. They're both equally scary. I think one is talked about more, and I think one is identified more than the other. And I learned that from kids. So when it comes to stuff like ADHD, generally boys are diagnosed with ADHD more because their ADHD is expressive. Now, that doesn't mean that girls don't get it. They're just not always as expressive. You know what I mean? So it's scary regardless, just like ADHD is ADHD, but it is an interesting place to be in. So I don't think narcissism was my thing. Again, so back to the video.
And will grow up to be a chronic people pleaser, put other people's needs before his own.
Nah, yeah, we're going to watch the whole video.
And also
I'm gonna
develop an
review it.
avoidant attachment. And he will have an intense fear of guilt and shame that originated from his mother. And he will cope with these wounds by avoiding conflict and try to be the good son, the good husband, always be pleasing, accommodating, understanding, patient. And he will have difficulty understanding and expressing his own needs and emotions. He will also be ultra sensitive to criticism because it subconsciously reminds him of the shame that he experienced from his mother. He will also have a very difficult time saying no and setting boundaries. You see, his mother didn't let him have any. She always knew best. And as an adult, he will attract a partner that will be very similar to his mother, who will also be controlling, critical, manipulative, and expect him to abandon himself to please her. Both his mother and romantic partners will share similar emotional wounds, both of them having a deep fear of abandonment and low self-worth. And until he begins to connect to the painful emotions that have been suppressed and reparent that little boy still inside him, he will continue to be emotionally unavailable to the people closest to him. He will continue to be a chronic liar, scared of conflict, and he will continue to live a life full of resentment as a result of abandoning himself over and over again. Now, if this even a little bit sounds like you, and you're ready to...
All right, so for the most part, we're going to go back to the scene. That's enough of the videos. So that one was very interesting. Now, there are things, I'm trained and I have my own understanding of things. So I don't, and I do my own research. I don't just take everything people say on face value. But there were some very poignant points that he made, because those are things that I've discussed with you all in that vulnerability aspect on working on healing. And as much as we are talking about a male mother wound, as you heard him talk about that, you did not hear anything that sounded gender specific. And I know for a fact, as I am helping people do their healing, if they have a mother, I've done a lot of work with women, and I know if they have a mother wound, they exhibit some of these behaviors as well. So the behaviors, like I said, intentions and outcomes, we're not worried about. The behaviors are not gender specific, which is why I'm applying it to you. But I do want to be able to stop and talk about it. Like I said, I don't think it's always narcissism. It's it's various things that can lead to this type of trauma. You know what I mean? And I think one of the main ways that we wind up having this type of trauma is being raised by traumatized people. One thing that we don't hear is our parents talking about how they went to therapy and how they took the steps to heal themselves. The most, if we have parents that did that, they new age, or the most they did was tell you go pray about it, right? Or go to church or something like that. But they definitely did not take they took very few steps to heal from their own traumas from childhood. So I think as much as he said likely it comes from narcissism, I don't think it likely comes from narcissism. I think it likely comes from traumatized parents raising kids. Grows up to be a people pleaser. We talked about that a lot. You know what I mean? As far as in the healing, on trying to get affirmations or get approvals from other people, wanting to be successful, wanting to do well, trying to get approvals, or even how we date in the dating process, trying to get people to judge us as valuable. You know what I mean? And it's wild because a lot of times when you talk about people pleasing, they always think, for a lack of better words, brown noser. Let me clean that up. Brown noser. But people pleasing isn't always brown nosing. That's just one example of the behavior. Sometimes people pleasing is successful people, overly successful, overly struck on success, because they want people to be pleased with their actions. They want to look at they want someone to look at their resume and be like, job well done. And I've said that myself. I've said, like, shoot, you should be able to tell from my resume. You should be able to tell from my resume. For real. Hold on, we got a comment. I can't even really see it. So thanks for making me know. I got to make them bigger now. Yeah, and they don't show up everywhere. Let me see if my multi-stream do it. Okay. So then something else that they wind up saying is, I'm gonna share your comment as soon as it shows up. Is you put others' needs before their own. Man, listen, I have been that person in personal life and in work life. I mean, working through the whole pandemic, I could die, but I wasn't worried about me dying. I was making sure that the families that I serve don't die. You know what I mean? That they don't experience anything crazy. You know what I mean? Or even in how I pick women. Sometimes, like for example, when we talked about my ex, one of the reasons I let her move in is because I put her needs before my own, which is crazy. So me went from living by myself to a woman with 3 children because somebody was selling her place and she needed. So I put her needs before myself. And we do that a lot. If we, especially under the guise of being an empath, that is as a matter of fact, I'm learning a lot of times that empath word is being a defense mechanism too, because it falls into this gap of putting other people's needs above yours. Avoiding attachment. I actually had to look that up because I was like, I don't know if I got that. But I talked about it a little bit earlier when I talked about ghosting, that idea of avoiding conflict. So avoiding attachment, if you take steps to avoid conflict a lot, yeah, you can definitely have this behavior. Intense fear of guilt and shame. I remember talking about creating boundaries. I see you say your mind was turned to mush trying to understand the person. Now it's hard for me to listen to a person struggle out of fear that they are trying to fish or trauma bond. You know what's wild about that concept about trauma bonding? That is a genuine concern, right? But I could tell, Leah, you're probably fairly new to the channel. But one of the things that we try to do is look at we are healing so that we can trust ourselves, and we're working to recognize an energy so we'll feel safe. We won't fall victim to trauma bonds and things like that, or we'll recognize when that's happening and we'll learn how to detach, right? So stay plugged in, and we'll be able to move out of that, because someone who's moving at the same pace wants to be understood. Like we said, when you're creating that space for vulnerability, as much as I said your role is to play, you have to also be looking for that other person to be providing that place for you as well. So if that place isn't there, then you know that's not necessarily the place to build a romantic relationship. But sometimes these bonds come in your life because you need to help them in a different way. You know what I mean? And trauma bonding is real, because one of the things that I'm thinking about is how I have trauma bonded with some of my friends in the past. I have a best friend that we kicked it with probably since 13. You know what I mean? And one of the things that I had to realize is some of our relationship is a trauma bond as well, because we had a lot of alone time. The only people that knew what we were doing was us. You know what I mean? And we bonded right there for what we saw as a lack of awareness of our parents. You know what I mean? Nobody knew what we was doing, period. So, like I was saying, trauma bonds are a real concern, but we want to make sure that we're not moving in an energy of fear. You know what I mean? We want to make sure that we're working on ourselves and doing the things that we can to recognize the energy so we can move in that healing energy and stay in that place. You know what I mean? So when it said the intense fear of guilt and shame, we talked about that in respects to drawing boundaries. You know what I mean? One of the difficulties I had in my healing process is feeling bad about drawing boundaries. Like, two examples of putting other people's needs avoided. Of this whole thing is when I told you that story about someone trying to sneak live with me, right? I had so much guilt around asking that person not to live with me. I had to ask for somebody else to give me advice to handle this situation. I didn't know what to do. Then after I asked them not to try to live with me, I still felt guilty and shame that I found myself in that situation. You know what I mean? Where we had to talk about give yourself grace, because you're not perfect. You're still going to make mistakes. But I was dealing with that and I didn't realize that. And I know it's not a me thing, because many of us have a guilt that comes across us when we have to draw boundaries. You know what I mean? Which keeps us from drawing boundaries because we don't want to deal with that guilty feeling, which ties back into that avoiding behavior. Then you try to be the good son. I literally tried to do that. I tried to do the best in Dr. Good in the school, which is how I graduated with 15 scholarships. Even though I was always home alone, I never had no house parties. I probably did one thing where I invited a group of people over there one time. Now, outside of that, I did plenty of dirt. Now, if you needed a place to take your girlfriend, I had come on through. Ain't nobody here. You know what I mean? But overall, I did my best to be seen as the good son, trying not to go to jail, trying not to interact with these things. Or I'm sure if you've been raised by traumatized parents, think about how many of your behaviors you did as a child to try to get them to see you as the good son or daughter, right? Then the good husband, and I deal with that between that and the good father, because that's the one that people randomly tell me. I don't have children. I've never been married. You know what I mean? But people always tell me you want to be you're going to be a good husband. You're going to be a good father. And that's a wild thing because it ties back into this persona I've built for myself in the sense that I want to be seen as that because I need that certain level of approval that I didn't get. You know what I mean? Because I have that hurt. Or I was raised in that situation where, because I hear a lot of people talk about it, but I was one of those kids that was pushed for greatness and excellence. And when you push for greatness and excellence, your greatness is always normalized. If you don't get straight A's, you can do better. But if you got better grades than 99% of your peers, didn't matter. You weren't number one. So like I said earlier, it's definitely a caution about pushing for excellence. You know what I mean? Always trying to be pleasant, accommodating, even that allowing people to stay for a week. That's what I just said with the person that was afraid to what's that. You always want the people to feel comfortable. And it's funny because I designed some of my persona around this as well as being seen as a good host. Ties into that. So does that always mean that me wanting to be a good host is this? No. Well, all of these together tie into that a little bit. And difficulty expressing some of his needs and emotions, which we talked about as far as the ghosting idea. You know what I mean? I definitely didn't feel safe in a lot of relationships to be able to communicate my feelings because a lot of times in those situations, when I would attempt to communicate my feelings, those moments get hijacked about how what I'm saying is making them feel. And that's crazy. You know what I mean? So I definitely had difficulties expressing my needs and emotions, which is crazy because I have no problems expressing my thoughts and ideas. And they say sensitive to criticism, and that is one, which is why we talked about being aware of your triggers, right? And I sensitive to criticism made me think of this post that I saved, and I wanted to talk to you all about it. So it's perfect time that it just came up now. But something that I saw specifically about disrespect, I'm thinking about criticism as well, because it says when someone criticizes you, beware the impulse to win their respect. So that sensitivity to criticism, a lot of times when we think about that sensitivity to criticism, we think it's going to make us outwardly defensive or aggressive, but it doesn't always, because it does make us defensive in the sense that we want to win that person's respect. So that's why one of my affirmations, when we talked about my show, and people got mad that I talked about them on the show, is I don't need your approval. So difficulty is saying no. We just talked about that as far as the guilt. It ties into that. An attract partner similar to his mom, or similar to your mom. Controlling, critical, manipulative, expect them to abandon themselves. And it's funny because I used to didn't think I attracted people like my mom until he said the partners share the similar emotional wounds. And he said that fear of abandonment. I generally 99% of the women I have dated have had this emotional wound, and I spent my time trying to win their approval or show them that they don't have to worry about being abandoned because I wouldn't do that. You know what I mean? And I'm sure that I'm not the only one. You can think about the times that you've dated people who've had an abandonment issue and the steps that you've taken that were over and beyond to help this person figure out that you wouldn't abandon them. But as we learn, some issues are our own. And so I think the most important thing in that video is something that he said on what to do to heal it. And it was like you got to connect to the painful emotions suppressed, which we talked about when that glass was broken. And I was able to see that little kid in me that was hurt. And I talked about I took a little time to connect to those emotions, bring back those memories, and love on myself to be able to to be able to work on the healing, to get to the point where I can be vulnerable enough to even talk to you all about it. But you got to work on that child inside of you. You got to work on those connect to those suppressed emotions so that you can heal for them. For the most part, I think that is it for tonight. I appreciate you staying on with me. You know what I mean? I appreciate you being patient with our little mistakes. Leah, the new guest, Marlena, glad to have you back. Leah, thanks for joining. Keisha's always, Liberty, I appreciate y'all. Remember, our rules, our space, our role in creating the vulnerability, acknowledging the vulnerability it has to create safe spaces for communication. Be mindful of the people who you give authority to judge your value, and make it clear that you're judging them as well. You know what I mean? And don't rob people of the opportunity for growth, even if that opportunity may wind up bringing in a little bit of conflict. But people all deserve the opportunity to grow. All right. So I appreciate you as always. I'll see you Thursday for Thursday night book club. And if you don't make it Thursday night book club, I don't know what next week is. I think I'm still in town. We will see you next Tuesday. As always, I appreciate the family. And we out.